There are moments in life that arrive disguised as insignificance, ordinary objects appearing at ordinary times, carrying within them the weight of moral consequence that will echo far beyond the moment of their discovery. The wallet Arjun Kapoor found on a Tuesday morning in early spring was such an object, worn brown leather softened by years of handling, faded stitching along its edges suggesting countless openings and closings, a small crack running along one corner like a fault line in something that had withstood pressure for years but was beginning to show its age. Nothing about its exterior hinted at wealth or importance. It looked like the kind of wallet a middle-aged man might carry for a decade, too familiar to replace despite its deterioration, too functional to abandon despite its lack of aesthetic appeal. The kind of object that becomes invisible through daily use, noticed only in its absence. Arjun had been walking to his morning shift at Sunrise Cafe, a small establishment tucked into a quiet street corner in a neighborhood that existed in the ambiguous space between gentrification and its previous working-class identity. The cafe served decent coffee to a mix of elderly regulars who'd lived in the area for decades and younger professionals who'd recently moved in, drawn by rent that was expensive but not yet prohibitive. Arjun worked the early shift, 5:30 a.m. to 1 p.m., making espresso drinks and warming pastries, his hands moving through familiar routines while his mind wandered to the second job waiting for him in the evening, delivery driving for a food app, navigating the city's traffic patterns until well past midnight. He'd been walking with that particular exhaustion that comes from sustained insufficient sleep, his body moving on autopilot while his consciousness operated at reduced capacity, when something on the sidewalk caught his peripheral vision. Not dramatically, just a shape that didn't belong to the usual urban detritus of discarded cups and flyers and fallen leaves. He stopped, backed up 2 steps, and looked down. The wallet lay on the concrete just outside the cafe's outdoor seating area, positioned as if it had slipped from someone's pocket while they were standing to leave. No one else was on the street at this hour, just before 6 a.m., that liminal time when the city was transitioning from night people heading home to day people beginning their routines. Arjun bent down and picked it up. The leather was cool to the touch, slightly damp from morning dew. He turned it over in his hands, noting its quality despite its age. This had been an expensive wallet once, made by someone who understood how materials should be stitched and shaped. He opened it, driven by the practical instinct to identify its owner so it could be returned. And found himself staring at contents that made his breath catch in his throat. First, the cash. Not a small amount forgotten in a billfold but a substantial stack of $100 bills, crisp and new, more money than Arjun typically saw in physical form. He didn't count them immediately, didn't want to, somehow, as if counting would transform curiosity into temptation, but even a glance suggested this was more than he earned in a week. Possibly 2 weeks. Second, credit cards. Several of them, black and metallic, the kind that signified not just wealth but a particular tier of wealth. Cards Arjun had seen in his delivery work, handed through car windows by people who lived in buildings with doormen and tipped generously without checking the amount. Third, and most significantly, a driver's license. Arjun pulled it from its clear plastic sleeve and read the name printed there, Elliot Vaughn. The name meant something. Meant a lot, actually, though Arjun couldn't immediately place all the associations. He knew it from somewhere, articles he'd scrolled past, videos that had appeared in his social media feeds, conversations overheard. The name carried weight, suggested importance, implied a world far removed from Arjun's own existence of double shifts and calculated spending and perpetual calculations about whether he could afford things beyond basic necessities. Arjun stood on the empty sidewalk, wallet in hand, and felt the moment expand around him. This was the kind of scenario people described hypothetically. What would you do if you found a lot of money? The philosophical question rendered suddenly, uncomfortably practical. He was 28 years old and had been working constantly since finishing his undergraduate degree 6 years ago, the degree that was supposed to open doors but had instead loaded him with debt while the doors remained mostly closed. He'd started with optimism and specific career ambitions, but reality had gradually revised his expectations downward. Now he worked 2 jobs that had nothing to do with his education, earning enough to survive but not to save, to pay bills but not to progress, to exist but not to build toward anything beyond the immediate future. The cafe job paid minimum wage plus tips that averaged out to an additional $3 per hour. The delivery driving paid slightly better but consumed his evenings and depended on algorithms that felt increasingly arbitrary in how they distributed orders. Together, these jobs provided enough income to cover his share of rent in an apartment he shared with 2 roommates, his student loan payments, his phone bill, his transit pass, his groceries purchased with careful attention to unit prices and weekly sales. There was never margin. Never breathing room. Never the ability to handle unexpected expenses without careful juggling of which bills could be delayed without serious consequences. An unexpected car repair 2 months ago had required him to pick up extra shifts and skip meals and still had resulted in a late payment on his credit card that would affect his credit score for years. And now he held in his hands more cash than he made in a week, belonging to someone who, based on that name, those cards, the quality of even this worn wallet, wouldn't miss it. Wouldn't even notice it was gone until he reached for his wallet and found it absent. Might replace the cash from an ATM without thinking about the amount, the way Arjun might replace a lost pen. No cameras were visible on this quiet street. No witnesses at this early hour. No one who would ever know what choice Arjun made in this moment except Arjun himself. Just the weight of the wallet in his hand and the choice it represented. Arjun didn't move for what felt like a long time but was probably only 30 seconds. He stood on the sidewalk, wallet in hand, his mind running calculations that were simultaneously practical and moral, financial and ethical. The practical calculation was straightforward: the cash in this wallet could solve immediate problems. Could pay his rent without the usual anxiety about whether his paycheck would clear in time. Could buy groceries without the mental mathematics of cost per serving and cheaper alternatives. Could repair the check engine light that had been glowing in his car for 3 weeks, the problem he'd been ignoring because the quote for fixing it had been $600 and he simply didn't have $600, would need to work extra shifts for a month to accumulate $600, and in the meantime he just drove carefully and hoped nothing catastrophic was wrong. This money could provide breathing room. Could create the margin he never had. Could transform the next 2 weeks from a stressful scramble to something approaching normalcy. And the person who'd lost it, Arjun pulled out his phone and quickly searched the name, Elliot Vaughn, wouldn't be materially affected by the loss. Wouldn't need to skip meals or delay rent or drive with a malfunctioning engine light because he couldn't afford repairs. The search results showed what Arjun had half remembered: venture capitalist, early investor in multiple successful tech companies, estimated net worth in the billions. Not millions, billions, with a B, an amount so large it became abstract, impossible to conceptualize in relation to actual lived experience. For someone like that, this cash was rounding error. A forgotten amount. Meaningless. Except it wasn't meaningless to Arjun. And this disparity, between what the money meant to its owner and what it could mean to him, created a reasoning that felt almost righteous. Wasn't he more deserving? Didn't he need it more? Wouldn't keeping it actually be a small redistribution from someone who had too much to someone who didn't have enough? Arjun felt his grip tighten on the wallet. Felt himself beginning to construct a narrative where keeping it wasn't theft but justice. Where his need outweighed the owner's claim. Where the morality of the situation was actually more complex than simplistic notions of finders keepers versus return what isn't yours. He imagined it, walking away with the wallet, extracting the cash, discarding the wallet itself in a dumpster a few blocks away. No one would know. The billionaire would file a report with his credit card companies, would get new cards issued within days, would never think about the incident again beyond a moment of minor inconvenience. And Arjun would have relief. Temporary but real. Enough to change the texture of his next few weeks from desperate scrambling to manageable stability. His fingers moved toward opening the wallet further, toward counting the exact amount, toward making it real rather than abstract. The first step toward taking it would be knowing exactly what he was taking. But then another thought arrived, quieter but insistent, and then what? He'd have the money. Could solve immediate problems. But he'd also have the knowledge of how he'd gotten it. Would carry the awareness every time he bought groceries with that cash, every time he paid rent, every time he got his car repaired. would know that this relief had come not from his own labor or luck or legitimate opportunity, but from taking something that wasn't his. Arjun had grown up with parents who'd emphasized certain values with the boring consistency of people who actually believed them rather than just performing belief. Honesty. Integrity. Hard work. The kind of values that sounded naive in a world that seemed increasingly to reward their opposites. His father drove a taxi for 30 years without ever overcharging a passenger or taking a longer route to inflate the fare. His mother cleaned houses and never took even small items that wouldn't be missed, returning forgotten jewelry she found while vacuuming, refusing tips that felt too large. They'd struggled their whole lives. Died without accumulating wealth or comfort. Their integrity had earned them nothing material, had arguably cost them opportunities that less scrupulous people had seized. And Arjun had watched this. Had absorbed the lesson that honesty was expensive. That following rules while others bent them meant falling behind. That nice guys finished last not because of cosmic justice but because nice guys played by restrictions that successful people ignored. He'd internalized a certain cynicism about morality. Had come to view his parents' rigid ethics as admirable but impractical. Had told himself that he'd be more flexible, more willing to do what was necessary to succeed in a world that didn't reward pure intentions. And yet, standing on this sidewalk with someone else's wallet in his hand, he discovered that their values had rooted deeper than his cynicism. That some part of him, shaped by childhood lessons he'd thought he'd outgrown, was asking questions he couldn't ignore. Who do you want to be? What kind of person do you want to become? If you take this, what other small compromises will feel justified next time? The money would solve problems. But it would create others. Not external ones, he'd almost certainly get away with it, but internal ones. Would create a fracture between who he wanted to be and who he'd actually become. Would establish a precedent that when faced with choice between integrity and advantage, he'd choose advantage. Arjun closed the wallet and looked up at the cafe where he was supposed to start his shift in 10 minutes. The choice crystallized: he could keep this money and compromise something fundamental about himself, or he could return it and remain someone he could respect. The decision, once framed that way, became simpler even as it remained difficult. Arjun walked into Sunrise Cafe carrying the wallet, his mind made up but his body still registering protest. Every practical part of him screamed that he was making a mistake, that he'd regret this choice every time he struggled with bills, that nobility was a luxury he couldn't afford. The manager, Patricia, a woman in her 50s who'd run this cafe for 20 years with patient efficiency, looked up from preparing the coffee machines for opening. "You're early. That's new." "I found something," Arjun said, holding up the wallet. "Was there a customer here yesterday evening who might have lost this?" Patricia's eyes widened slightly as she recognized the quality of the wallet despite its wear. "What's the name?" "Elliot Vaughn." "Oh." Patricia set down the coffee filter she'd been holding. "Oh. Yes. He was here around closing. Sat outside for maybe 20 minutes, then left in a hurry. Took a phone call and just walked off." She looked at Arjun carefully. That's a lot of money to find and bring back." Arjun heard the unspoken question, "Why did you?" "Do you have his contact information?" he asked instead of answering. Patricia shook her head. "But the address on his ID, that's one of those buildings downtown. The Harbor View Complex. You know the ones." Arjun knew the ones. Glass towers that had transformed the skyline 5 years ago, luxury apartments that cost more per month than he made in a year. The kind of building where you couldn't even enter the lobby without being cleared by security. "I'll return it after my shift," Arjun said. "Or..." Patricia hesitated. "You could leave it here. I could call him. You don't have to personally." "I'll return it," Arjun interrupted gently. "I want to." He didn't examine that statement too closely. Didn't question why he felt compelled to personally hand this wallet back rather than leaving it with Patricia or dropping it at a police station or any of the easier options. Just knew that he needed to complete this action himself, to see it through, to have the full experience of choosing integrity rather than having chosen it abstractly. His shift passed slowly. He made espresso drinks and warmed pastries and exchanged pleasantries with customers, all while the wallet sat in his bag in the back room, its presence a constant awareness. He kept expecting relief, the satisfaction of having made the right choice. Instead, he mostly felt tired and slightly foolish, the cynical part of his mind providing running commentary on what an idiot he was being. At 1:15 p.m., shift complete, Arjun took the bus downtown to the Harbor View complex. The building was exactly what he'd expected, all glass and steel and architectural ambition, the kind of structure that announced wealth without apology. The lobby was marble and modern art, temperature-controlled and acoustically managed to create an atmosphere of hushed luxury. Security stopped him immediately, a man in a tailored uniform who managed to be both polite and unmistakably clear that Arjun did not belong here. "I'm here to return something," Arjun said, holding up the wallet. "It belongs to Elliot Vaughn." The guard's expression shifted slightly, surprise followed by professional neutrality. "I'll need to verify that with Mr. Vaughn." He made a call. Spoke quietly. Looked at Arjun with slightly more interest. "He'll see you. 20th floor." The elevator was one of those glass boxes that showed you the city dropping away as you ascended, an experience designed to remind you of exactly how high you'd risen, literally and metaphorically. Arjun kept his eyes on the floor numbers. The 20th floor hallway was silent, carpeted in something thick enough to absorb all sound. Only 4 doors, suggesting apartments of substantial size. Arjun found the number the guard had given him and knocked before he could overthink it. The man who opened the door was younger than Arjun had expected, mid-40s, dressed casually in dark jeans and a gray sweater, his face showing the kind of relaxed confidence that came from never having to worry about money. But his eyes were sharp, assessing, taking in Arjun with the same attention Arjun imagined he gave to investment opportunities. "Elliot Vaughn," he said, extending his hand. "Arjun Kapoor." The handshake was firm, brief. "You found my wallet." Not quite a question. "Outside Sunrise Cafe. This morning." Arjun held it out. Elliot took it, opened it, did a quick inventory. Arjun watched him count the cash. There were $800 bills, $800 that could have been Arjun's, and checked the cards. Everything was there. Everything was intact. "You didn't have to do this," Elliot said, looking up from the wallet to Arjun's face. "You could have kept the cash, ditched the wallet, and I never would have known who took it." "I know," Arjun said simply. "Most people wouldn't have returned it." Elliot's tone was analytical rather than judgmental, stating what he believed to be a fact about human behavior. "Maybe. Not maybe. Definitely." Elliot closed the wallet but didn't pocket it, still studying Arjun. "Why did you?" It was the same question Patricia had implied, but asked directly, demanding an honest answer. Arjun thought about polite deflections, about shrugging it off. But something about this moment, about having come this far, having made this choice, standing in this hallway that represented a world completely foreign to his own, made him want to be truthful. "Because I don't want to win at life by losing myself," he said. "The money would have helped. I need money. I work 2 jobs and barely make rent. But keeping it would have meant becoming someone I don't want to be. So I didn't." Elliot was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he smiled, not the polite social smile of someone being gracious, but something more genuine, more thoughtful. "That's a better answer than I expected," he said. "Most people would have said something about doing the right thing because it's right. Which is true but abstract. You made it personal. About identity rather than morality." Arjun wasn't sure how to respond to that analysis of his own reasoning, so he just nodded. "Do you have a business card?" Elliot asked. "I make espresso drinks and deliver food," Arjun said with a slight smile. "Not exactly business card professions." "Then give me your number." Elliot pulled out his phone, a different one than what had presumably been in the wallet, a backup. "I want to stay in touch." "Why?" The question came out before Arjun could filter it into something more polite. Because integrity when no one's watching is the rarest commodity in the world, Elliot said. And I invest in rare commodities. The call came a week later. Arjun was between shifts, had just finished at the cafe and was grabbing a quick meal before starting delivery driving, when his phone showed an unfamiliar number. Arjun. It's Elliot Vaughn. Do you have a few minutes? They met at a restaurant Arjun had delivered food to dozens of times but had never eaten at, the kind of place where the menu didn't list prices because if you had to ask, you couldn't afford it anyway. Elliot had already arrived, sitting at a corner table with a view of the city, and he gestured for Arjun to sit. I've been thinking about our conversation, Elliot said after they'd ordered, or rather, after Elliot had ordered for both of them, deferring to the server's recommendations in a way that suggested this was routine. About why you returned the wallet. About integrity being about identity rather than just following rules. Arjun waited, uncertain where this was going. I review a lot of business proposals, Elliot continued. Investment opportunities. People want funding for ideas, some good, some terrible, most somewhere in between. And the thing I've learned over 20 years of investing is that the idea matters less than the person behind it. I can live with a mediocre idea executed by someone I trust. I can't live with a brilliant idea executed by someone who'll cut corners when no one's watching. Okay, Arjun said slowly. So here's my question, if you had access to capital, what would you build? Not what you think I want to hear, but what you actually care about. The question caught Arjun off guard. He'd spent years not thinking about what he'd build because building required resources he didn't have, and dwelling on impossible scenarios felt like a waste of mental energy better spent on surviving the present. But the question had been asked, and Elliot was waiting with the patient attention of someone who had all the time in the world, and Arjun found himself answering honestly. A platform connecting immigrants with translation and navigation services, he said. My parents spent years struggling with systems they didn't fully understand, medical, legal, financial, because their English was functional but not fluent and they couldn't afford professional help. They made mistakes that cost them money and opportunity because they didn't have access to people who could help them understand complex systems in their own language. I'd build something that made that help accessible and affordable. He stopped, half expecting Elliot to dismiss this as unsophisticated or unprofitable. Instead, Elliot nodded thoughtfully. That's personal. That's rooted in real need rather than market analysis. Tell me more. And Arjun did. Found himself describing a system he'd been thinking about unconsciously for years, a subscription model that would be affordable for working-class immigrants, a network of bilingual professionals who could help navigate everything from medical bills to rental agreements, quality controls to ensure the help was legitimate rather than exploitative. He talked about the market, millions of immigrants like his parents, underserved by existing services that were either too expensive or too impersonal. He talked about the social impact beyond just profit. When he finished, Elliot was quiet for a moment. Then, I'll fund it. Arjun blinked. What? Initial capital for development. I'll connect you with people who can help with the technical build. You'll have to quit both jobs and commit full-time, and there's no guarantee it'll succeed, but I'll give you 18 months of runway to find out. In exchange, I want equity, we can negotiate the specifics, and I want quarterly meetings where you're completely honest about what's working and what isn't. Arjun struggled to process this. Why? Because 2 weeks ago you returned my wallet when you could have kept it. Which means when you have access to other people's resources, in this case, investor money, you'll treat it with the same integrity. You'll make decisions based on what's right rather than what's easy. And that's worth investing in. The restaurant server arrived with their food, plates of things Arjun couldn't identify, artfully arranged in ways that suggested more attention to aesthetics than quantity. He looked down at it, then back up at Elliot. This isn't a reward, Elliot said, as if reading Arjun's thoughts. I'm not giving you money because you were a good person. I'm investing in a business opportunity because your decision-making process when no one was watching suggested you're someone who can be trusted with resources. There's a difference. Arjun understood the distinction. This wasn't charity. This was a bet on his character translating into business success. "I accept," he said. 3 years after finding the wallet, Arjun stood in an office that still felt surreal, his own space in a small but growing company, walls covered with testimonials from clients whose lives had been tangibly improved by access to services they couldn't have navigated alone. Bridge Connect had grown beyond his initial vision, expanding from translation services to comprehensive immigrant support, from 1 city to 3, from break-even to profitable. The success wasn't dramatic, they weren't a unicorn startup, weren't attracting billion-dollar valuations. But they were sustainable, growing steadily, making a difference that could be measured in individual lives rather than just aggregate numbers. Arjun had learned that running a business meant making countless small choices that echoed that original choice on the sidewalk, the choice between integrity and advantage, between what was right and what was easy, between who he wanted to be and who it might be more profitable to become. He'd had opportunities to compromise. Investors who'd wanted him to expand faster than he thought was sustainable. Potential partners who'd wanted to shift the business model toward higher profit services that would have excluded his original target market. Employees who'd cut corners that wouldn't have been noticed but would have degraded service quality. Each time, he'd thought about the wallet. About standing on that sidewalk with $800 in his hand and choosing who he wanted to be rather than what he wanted to have. And each time, the choice had gotten slightly easier. In an interview for a business podcast, the host had asked, "What was the turning point for you? What moment made you go from working 2 minimum wage jobs to running a successful company?" Arjun had thought about the expected answer, meeting Elliot Vaughn, getting funding, building the platform. The narrative of discovery and investment and entrepreneurial success. Instead, he'd said, finding a wallet on a sidewalk. The host had laughed, thinking it was a metaphor. It wasn't. The wallet, ordinary brown leather, worn from use, containing money Arjun desperately needed but didn't take, had been the inflection point. Not because of what was in it, but because of what returning it revealed about who Arjun was when no one was watching. That revelation had impressed Elliot, yes. But more importantly, it had clarified something for Arjun himself, that integrity wasn't a luxury he couldn't afford but a foundation he couldn't succeed without. The money he didn't take would have solved 2 weeks of problems. The integrity he maintained had built 3 years of success. Integrity isn't tested when the world is watching, it's tested when no one is. This is the fundamental truth that Arjun's story illustrates. The choices that define us aren't the public ones where reputation is at stake and witnesses are present, but the private ones where we're alone with ourselves and our decisions, where no one will ever know what we chose except us. These moments arrive disguised as insignificance. A wallet on a sidewalk. A cashier's mistake in your favor. An opportunity to claim credit for work you didn't do. A chance to slight someone who'll never know it was you. The test isn't dramatic, no witnesses, no consequences, no audience to impress or disappoint. Just you and the choice and the question of who you want to be when no one's looking. Most people fail these tests. Not because they're bad people, but because the incentives are backward. Integrity costs something in the moment, money, opportunity, advantage, and pays dividends that are delayed and uncertain. Taking the easier path provides immediate relief with no apparent consequences. So we take the easier path. We keep the wallet, pocket the advantage, make the compromise. And we tell ourselves it's fine, it's practical, it's how the world works, everyone does it, we'll be honest when it matters, but this particular moment doesn't matter. Except every moment matters. Every small choice either reinforces or erodes the foundation of who you are. Keep enough wallets and you become someone who keeps wallets, not just in action but in identity, not just in what you do but in who you've become. This isn't about rigid morality or performing virtue. It's about the practical reality that integrity is cumulative. Each choice to do right when no one's watching builds trust, primarily trust with yourself, but also trust that others can sense even if they can't articulate why. Each choice to compromise, conversely, creates a foundation of sand that will eventually collapse under any significant weight. Arjun could have kept that money. Would almost certainly have gotten away with it. Elliot Vaughn would have filed a report, gotten new cards, replaced the cash, and never thought about it again. Arjun would have had 2 weeks of relief and no external consequences. But he would have known. Would have carried that knowledge. Would have established a precedent that when faced with the choice between integrity and advantage, he'd choose advantage. And that precedent would have influenced the next choice, and the next, accumulating into a person he didn't want to become. The call to action here isn't to return every wallet you find. It's to examine the moments in your own life where integrity is tested privately, where no one's watching, where compromise would be easy and probably consequence-free. Those are the moments that matter. Those are the choices that define you. Choose wisely. Not because it guarantees reward, it doesn't. Not because virtue always wins, it doesn't. Not because doing right feels good in the moment, it usually doesn't. Choose wisely because the alternative is becoming someone you can't respect. Because integrity isn't about getting rewards but about being able to live with yourself. Because the person you are when no one's watching is the person you actually are, and that person needs to be someone you can build a life on. The world needs people who return wallets. Not because wallets matter, but because the character revealed in that choice, the integrity that persists when no one's watching, the honesty that costs something in the moment but builds something sustainable over time, that's what creates trust, opportunity, and relationships that matter. Choose wisely. Be StoryWise.